Hey there, how you doing? Good to have you with us on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie as we start another new week of broadcasts. And of course, as always, your takes, your input, your involvement really help to drive this show and make it what it is. So right away, we'll give you the phone number, 1-800-585-9396, 800-585-9396. On this program, Debbie, as we tell our listeners, we like to introduce or address topics that are a part of everyday life. And today we picked something that I think most of our listeners will figure out that they're familiar with, but they may not know it by what the name it goes under, and that is sacred polyphony. A lot of people may be wondering, Debbie, what that is. So we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction today, Deb, but I think it's going to be a very enlightening broadcast for our listeners.
I couldn't agree more, Jerry. Sacred polyphony, that's the topic today. So if you, once you hear a little bit more about it, maybe the history of where it was derived from and how it could be used in our sacred liturgies, and possibly you're going to recognize some of the elements of it, and maybe you'll want to share your experience. I certainly have an experience that I'm going to hold until the very end of the show, Jerry, because I got to hear some of the clips of it, and I'll share that at the end, what happened to me. So if you, dear listeners, want to weigh in on this as you start to hear the conversation unfold, please do at 1-800-585-9396.
Yeah, and it comes from polyphony. Polyphony is just it's a word that means a type of singing that consists of two or more simultaneous lines of independent melody, two or more voices, and it becomes sacred when it is hymns that are sung to God and glory of God. So if you are, for example, if you're familiar with the Latin Mass, for example, you probably have heard this. There are scholas and ensembles. And today's guest, we have a guest joining us here to talk about this. He is going to enlighten us considerably on sacred polyphony. His name is Chris Mueller. He has been an organist and choir master for the Basilica of St. John the Evangelist in Stamford, Connecticut. Prior to that, he worked 12 and a half years as the director of music for the Church of Notre Dame and the Columbia University Catholic Campus Ministry. He's an experienced conductor of Gregorian chant, there you go, there's a hint, and sacred Renaissance polyphony. Additionally, he's composed over 200 sacred choral works. We're going to hear clips from a couple of those on today's program. So, Chris, pardon the delay in getting to you, but welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. How are you?
No, I'm fine. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you're very welcome. As we mentioned to our listeners, Chris, they probably have come across sacred polyphony at some point, but may not have known it by name. So, as Debbie mentioned, give us a little bit of the history of this, or first of all, actually, just kind of define for our listeners what it is we're talking about today.
Sure. Well, sacred polyphony, as you mentioned, the word polyphony comes from the Greek for many sounds, and it just means two or more independent melodies happening simultaneously. It's something that grew out of Gregorian chant. Gregorian chant, as you know, is just one line of melody that happens. And at some point, after singing Gregorian chant for 1,000 years, 1,100 years, some monks and some choristers and cathedrals and various people started to experiment with singing the chant at different pitch levels at the same time, and then some of them started to introduce their own rhythmic variations, and then gradually the lines that were being sung became more and more divergent. And then somewhere in the early 13th century, in Paris, at the Cathedral of Notre Dame and other places, composers started to actually write down, to notate different ways of singing independent lines. And we had Paratin and Magister and some of these early composers that said, well, instead of just having singers improvise changes to these melodies, let me try to think of some ways they could do this and write them down. And polyphony was born, you could say, as a compositional style, and then it evolved over the next several hundred years, reaching its peak, I think, for the church's sacred music at the end of the 16th century, the end of the Renaissance period, with the great composers such as Palestrina, Lassus, Byrd and Tallis in England, Victoria in Spain, and it's a remarkable, well-structured, very beautiful way of conveying biblical texts, and it has a lot of power and a lot of beauty, and I think a lot of serenity, too. It's not often overtly emotional music, which separates it from opera and other styles that come later. It's just something about the interlocking lines that's so crystalline and beautiful and kind of amazing. And it serves as a very good vehicle for presenting text and giving us, the listeners or the singers, a chance to meditate and pray over these small, usually, snippets of biblical text from the Psalms or elsewhere that the pieces are portraying.
So, Chris, let me ask you this question, because it's safe to say that this was born out of a Gregorian chant. And the reason why I say this is you were talking about the Middle Ages and of when the style, the composition happened. I love Gregorian chant, but I'm going to share at the end what happened when I was listening to the clips that you sent over with this style of sacred music, and it's really unbelievable. And I can't imagine that. I just can't imagine that I'm the only one that felt this way having listened to it. So I'm curious as to, is it safe to say it's born out of Gregorian chant?
Oh yes, most definitely.
Okay. Well, that's interesting, because there's been many, many studies, as you know, on Gregorian chant and what it does to the heart rate of people when they're listening to it, and how to get into that meditation and just to totally feel a tremendous amount of spiritual peace. And it's interesting. Can you comment a little bit on that? Because I've always been fascinated by Gregorian chant and what it does to people, because they've even played it in hospitals and stuff, and it's interesting what it does to the body.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating point. When people listen to Gregorian chant, they know, I think, right away, instinctively, that it's some kind of religious music, which makes it all the more remarkable that every 5 or 10 years, we have some Gregorian chant record that suddenly rockets to the top of the Billboard bestseller list, going back to the early 90s and those monks in Spain. And recently we've had these sisters in, I think, Nebraska, who've had a couple of chart-topping recordings of chant and monastic music from their community. And people resonate with that. People are hungry for a sense of the sacred, even as our culture tries to convince us that there is no such thing as sacred, that everything is all opinion, and that nothing is any more true than anything else. At the human level, we intuit that that's not the case. And when you hear the long flowing lines of Gregorian chant, it speaks to your heart of something outside of yourself, that there's something more than the quotidian reality that I'm living, that my heart is searching for. And like Augustine says, my heart is restless until it rests in you. And I think Gregorian chant, in a powerful and kind of unique way, points us to God, and it resonates with us in that way. And that probably has something to do with why it lowers people's heart rates and things like that. It really does give us a sense of the serene and a sense of the otherworldly. In musical terms, Gregorian chant typically doesn't have a regular pulse. So like a march or a waltz or something that has a repeating pulse, Gregorian chant doesn't do that.
Exactly.
And so you can't get emotionally worked up by a beat the way that you can with a lot of music that comes after that. Instead, you have these underlying changes of twos and threes, and it can be very meditative once you allow yourself to be drawn in to where the music is taking you. And like I said, it takes you to someplace outside of yourself. And it's inherently religious music, and I think people want that and are seeking that in their lives.
Right. Well, Chris, we have Chris Mueller with us today, and we're excited because we're getting queued up. I believe the first clip of one of the music is ready. Okay, good. This is good because I really want our listeners to hear this, Chris, because I have my own personal little theories on the reason why secular music appeals to people and then sacred music. I just have my theories on it from my catechetical training, and I'm curious to see if you would agree with that. So, dear listeners, please listen up and then call in and share about this great sacred music. 1-800-585-9396. Remember, you drive the show, and Chris Mueller is with us. He's an expert on it, and so you can ask him all these questions that speak to your soul. 1-800-585-9396.
Yeah, maybe you've got a take on how sacred polyphony has really been a blessing in your life, maybe help to calm you down, or maybe you want to contrast it to different music styles in the world today, even different liturgical music styles, and share your take, ask your questions. You've got someone who really knows what he's talking about today on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Again, our number is 1-800-585-9396. Chris, we have a couple of clips from pieces from your ensemble, Ars Mueller, and the first one we are going to have you describe for us and then play, and then we'll get to our first break. It's Surrexit Pastor Bonus. Would you tell us about this one?
Sure. There's a not so well-known composer named Jean Laretier, who was a French composer from the early 16th century, and he wrote a lot of music, including this piece, which I think is one of his most remarkable and perhaps one of the most remarkable pieces to come out of this whole era of Renaissance polyphony. This particular piece, Surrexit Pastor Bonus, the Good Shepherd has arisen, it opens with these rising lines in the soprano, and it's this incredibly mystical and reverent portrayal of Christ rising from the dead. And of course, we don't know how that happened. We know that it happened, but we don't know how it happened. And this beautiful, powerful music gives us this peek into the mystery of what his resurrection might have been like. And it's something that I like to program every year on the fourth Sunday of Easter, which is Good Shepherd Sunday. So the text fits the feast, and the music fits the text, and it's just a beautiful marriage of sentiment and mysticism and the joy of the resurrection and the ineffability of the resurrection.
All right, this is Ars Mueller, Surrexit Pastor Bonus. Our producer today is Jeff Burson. He will go ahead and play that first clip for us now. I think maybe it's not quite ready yet. Do we have the clip, Jeff? There
it is.
That is very beautiful. That is just a sampling of Surrexit Pastor Bonus, and that is sung, performed by the ensemble Ars Mueller. Chris Mueller is with us here. He leads that ensemble. As we go to our first break here on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, now you have a better understanding of what sacred polyphony is. Maybe you are involved in a schola or an ensemble. Maybe you are especially drawn to this kind of music, or you're just interested and curious to learn more about it. Today you have an opportunity with Chris Mueller. Our phone number is 1-800 1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. So we're going to get Jeff to play our break for us right now. So, Jeff, if you want to roll that music, we will get back here in just a minute. We have a lot more that we're going to talk about. I'm Jerry Usher along with Debbie Georgiani. What is sacred polyphony and how does it fit into our lives? 1-800-585-9396. Please join us.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
We're all here, we've all been created by God for one thing, and that is to become holy. And I think we kind of think holiness is one of those stiff-necked things that you do, but it isn't. It's a very normal thing. Jesus acted very normal and human, though he was divine. He groaned when he heard from Mary and Martha that Lazarus was dead. And he must have smiled when Martha reminded him that he made dead 4 days. Can you imagine a woman trying to explain death to God? I would.
May is dedicated to our Blessed Mother. Visit EWTN's Facebook page to see the many ways EWTN viewers and listeners around the world are celebrating Mary's Month. #MayAltar.
Hi, this is Barbara McWiggin.
This is Bishop Joseph Bambera of the Diocese of Scranton.
I'm Brian Patrick, EWTN News Nightly Anchor, and you're listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
We're so glad you joined us on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Today we're talking about sacred polyphony, and Chris Mueller is with us. He is amazing, I think, because listening to you, Chris, I am just... my heart just keeps racing. I want to hold this till the end of the show, but I can't any longer, because now that our listeners have heard that clip that we just played of that sacred piece, I wanted just to share with you, Chris, and you tell me if I'm going crazy or something, because I felt it very strongly. That the music speaks to my soul. And the regular secular music, it tends to speak to my heart. What I mean by that is my heart gets pounding from the beat of the music, and that's great. It's a great so-called feeling. But this, for some reason, speaks to my soul. I could feel it was very unique. Am I the only one feeling this way about it, or what is the feedback on this, Chris?
Well, it's interesting that you would make that distinction, because that distinction has been around in philosophy for 2,500 years. It was something that Plato wrote about when he was talking about the music that stirs up the passions and music that stirs up the spirit, or that stirs up the soul. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the same distinction that you have encountered, that there's music with a driving beat that you say is it pumps you up, it gives you a certain kind of emotional experience, and then there's a different kind of music that reaches you in a different way, that lifts you outside of yourself, that draws you to something else, that stirs your soul. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what chant and polyphony, its offspring, if you will, that's what they can do. That's the power that they have to point us to something different. And Plato thought that music that drove the passions was dangerous, because our passions can easily take control of us, and that we need the music that stirs our spirit to remind us that the spirit is meant to control the passions and not the other way around. And certainly in today's world, with so much noise and with music everywhere and with exhortations to give in to the passions, music that taps us in a different way is, I think, more needed than ever. And particularly in a liturgical context, where the point of the liturgy isn't how I feel, but instead it's God, you are amazing. You have given us life. You have given us yourself in the Eucharist. You have redeemed your creatures. You became one of us. We need music that helps the liturgy show us this transcendent reality that's just so different from the rest of our lives. As somebody said to me very early on in my sacred music career, a conductor that I was working with said, what happens at church isn't like what happens in the rest of your life. God doesn't become present in front of you in the rest of your life. And so the music at church should reflect that, and it shouldn't be like the music that you hear everywhere else, because what happens at Mass isn't what happens everywhere else. So there needs to be a unique music to represent this unique reality that happens in the liturgy. And chant has always been a part of the Catholic Mass, the Christian worship, and Polyphony, for 800 years, coming out of chant has also been a very natural outgrowth and reflection of our liturgical prayer.
Well, let's go to your calls. A lot of you want to speak with Chris Mueller, our guest here today, talking about sacred polyphony on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Our number, if you'd like to join us, when we do free up a line, they're full right now. It's 1-800-585-9396. Kathy called first, so you get to go first. Kathy's driving through Mississippi, listening to EWTN Radio on Sirius XM 130. Hi, Kathy. Welcome to the program.
Hi. It's great to talk with you guys. Hi, Chris.
Hi there.
Go right ahead, Kathy.
Okay. What I was saying was that I listen to it when I drive. I live in New Orleans and in Niceville, Florida, and I'm on my way to Niceville for some paddleboarding with my puppy dog. But I listen to it all the time. And I'm a CCD teacher for 15 years. I've shared it with my class. And I've purchased many CDs before I figured out how to buy music through iTunes. And I listen to it in the car. I have speakers that I take with me on the boat or anywhere. And I use it when I do my yoga stretching. And I know that there's been some debate among Catholics as to whether yoga is allowed by Catholics. And I personally believe that it is, especially when I'm doing my movements to the inspiring sounds of the Gregorian chant music. I specifically found it at a Benedictine monastery in St. Benedict, Louisiana, near Covington. They're flooded at the moment and accepting donations for restoring themselves. I'm sure that Abbot Justin would be thrilled for the little plug there. So I'm friends with many people there. Father Augustine and St. Augustine is one of my favorite authors. And I'm writing a book on spiritual appetite. And I'll be attending classes at Notre Dame Seminary. Archbishop Amen in New Orleans started up a class there called Ilum for the laity. Anyway, so I'm sure that I'll get more exposure to more music there, and I'm very thankful for it. I believe that in a world, like you said, there's an awful lot of noise. The more we listen to, in the last 30 years, been blessed to have discovered this chant music. It does feed the soul, as another person had commented earlier, and like nothing else. And it is more in line with when you read in Scripture about speaking in tongues, which, of course, is the receiving and not the giving. It's not all that babbling that you hear people pretentiously making noise with. It is a receiving of God's Word, and in a language that it does speak to the soul, because it is not the language that we speak as we are at this moment.
Kathy, you mentioned a lot of great points. And Chris, I'm going to ask you to queue up your replies to Kathy for the other side of our break here. We got to step aside just for a quick second. Kathy, great call, great contribution. And Lisa and Dr. Ronald and Joan and the others on the line. We're going to get to all of you today on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Our guest is Chris Mueller. He is for many, many years he served as choir master and organist for the Basilica of St. John the Evangelist in Stamford, Connecticut, and also director of music for the Church of Notre Dame and the Columbia University Catholic Campus Ministry. We have actually another clip of Chris's that we're going to play for you as well, but he'll have some thoughts for you, Kathy, on the other side of the break, and we will get to all of your other calls. Our number is 1-800-585-9396. Talking today about sacred Polyphony, one of the great patrimonies as Catholic Christians. More of Take Two with Jerry and Debbie just ahead.
Welcome to EWTN's Catholic Almanac.
It's May 23rd, and St. John Baptiste de Rossi died on this day in 1764. St. John loved to catechize among the laborers, traveling from farm to farm. His preaching inspired his listeners to come to him to confess their sins. Also today, the Church honors Saint Ivo of Chartres. He was a counselor to King Philip I of France, whom he criticized for divorcing and then remarrying. For this, he was imprisoned for several years.
We're all familiar with the gospel where Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet while her sister Martha does the cooking and cleaning. And when Martha complains, Jesus says, "Martha, Martha, you're anxious and worried about many things. There's need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better portion." That gospel always bothered me. Look, if Martha weren't cooking and cleaning, no one would have eaten. But if you think about it, Jesus didn't say, "Martha, Martha, stop cooking." He said, "Stop being anxious about many things." It's okay to work hard, but Jesus is telling us, don't be busy, be occupied. If there's 100 things on your plate, make sure only one thing is on your heart. And what's that one thing? Love. Receive each task as a gift from God. Offer it back to Him and do it all with love in imitation of Jesus. I know, easier said than done. Lord, help us to be like Mary when we have to work like Martha. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
How is it possible that God created everything?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
Why is the Catholic Church so unwilling to The Catholic Church is too rich.
Catholics worship Mary and are committed.
As far as I'm concerned, all religions are equal.
You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. Today, 2 p.m. Eastern, on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, and we heard from Kathy driving through Mississippi. And Chris, sounds like she makes use, quite extensive use of things like Gregorian chant and sacred polyphony throughout many times of her day. That's got to be it's got to be, if you pardon the pun, music to your ears.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that she would say that. You know, that she listens to it while she's driving and while she's doing yoga and things like that. My question would be whether or not she ever hears this music as an actual part of the masses that she attends or the liturgies where she worships, because that's the context for which it was originally created. And the music is so beautiful, and as we have mentioned, how it stirs the soul in this kind of unique way. And so people want to hear this music elsewhere. And as an aside, there are an enormous number of professional choral groups who specialize in polyphony, the Tallis Scholars and the 16, and all kinds of ensembles that make this beautiful music the bread and butter of their professional work, Stile Antico and a number of others, because they recognize the beauty of it and the experience of singing it and the profundity of sharing this music with other people. And yet, a lot of people who are drawn to the beauty don't necessarily seem interested in the environment in which that beauty was created, which was to say that most of these composers were themselves Catholic. They were writing for the church, for the liturgy, for this experience of prayer. And I think that it's interesting that the music, which has, it doesn't have a top 40 kind of following, but in classical music circles, there are a lot of people who do sacred polyphony, and I think it's interesting that the music is renowned for its beauty, and yet it is so infrequently heard in the context for which it was created that in most places we don't hear this kind of music in the Mass. And I wonder how our spiritual lives would be changed if chant and polyphony were, so to speak, the soundtrack to our worship, and not, this thing that used to happen or this thing that I can listen to in other parts of my life, which is, of course, fine. But if it were integral to the way that we prayed, how would our spiritual lives be changed?
Right. Right. Enhanced. Absolutely. Well, we'd love to go back to Kathy, but she's busy driving through Mississippi, so I'm sure she dropped off to listen to your comment, Chris. But Kathy, thank you so much for calling in. We appreciate your comments so very much, and we're gonna move right along. We're gonna try to get to everyone today because so many of you have great comments you want to share. So, Dr. Ronald, you are listening next on EWTN Radio at Franciscan University on God's Love Radio. Hi, Dr. Ronald. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and our special guest, Chris Mueller.
Hi, this is Dr. Ronald Dubois.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Doctor.
This is Dr. Ronald Dubois. I teach Gregorian chant at Franciscan University of Steubenville in Ohio. And I'm very, very happy to hear this program today. Gregorian chant has changed my life for the better. I've been teaching Gregorian chant at Franciscan University since 2007. And I would just like to offer a few resources to your listeners, if that's okay. Is that fine with you?
Yeah, briefly, and then we want to certainly...
The more resources, the better.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'll try to be as brief as possible. In my class, it's called an Introduction to Gregorian Chant. The first text that I use is called A Gregorian Chant Masterclass by Dr. Theodore Maurier, and is compiled by my chant mentor named Scott Turkington. It's a wonderful resource. It's in 10 sections with a CD, and it's a wonderful introduction to the chant. Also, I would recommend the website of the Church Music Association of America, and that is musicasacra.com, musicasacra.com, and their journal that comes out quarterly called Sacred Music, wonderful resource for sacred polyphony and Gregorian chant. I'd also like to recommend the CDs produced by the Benedictine monks of Salem in France. In my opinion, they're the world experts on Gregorian chant and have published not only many, many CDs, but many books that are used in the chant. And concerning the use of chant today, I sing in the St. Peter's Church Choir here in Steubenville, Ohio, and our director is Andrew Barnick, who just graduated from Franciscan a year ago, and we sing Gregorian chant at the 10 a.m. Mass every Sunday. And I'm just absolutely delighted about that. So Chris, I just wanted to thank you for your work, and I hope that you and I get to meet someday. So that's really all I wanted to say.
Thank you for your work, too. I'm glad that there are many exponents of chant out there, because I think the world needs chant, and as you say, we can all benefit from it.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Dubois, I want to thank you as well. You're at my alma mater, so in fact, we just had your colleague, Dr. Mark Miravalli, on the show a week or so ago.
I heard that show.
Oh, you did? Well, I was a little bit before your time there, graduated in 92, but still have very, very fond memories of my years at Franciscan University. And it's great to hear that you have this part of the curriculum going there now. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And thank you for listening and calling Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. We appreciate it. Over to Lisa. She's been holding a good long time in Bismarck, North Dakota, listening to EWTN Radio on Real Presence Radio. Hi, Lisa. You're on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. I am with Debbie. I am having a hard time containing myself over this topic, and I'm so happy to be hearing this. And you guys had kind of covered some of the comments I had, specifically about, sacred music versus, secular. especially when it comes to Mass. I was wondering if your guest could comment a little bit specifically about like the use of the contemporary Christian rock as liturgical music, and some practical ways to actually implement the Gregorian chant or the Sacred Polyphony in the Mass. I have come up against, quite a bit of resistance when it comes to this. Usually what they say is, well, we have to cater to everybody's taste, and the rock music brings the kids in. So I was wondering if you could speak a little about real practical ways of implementing something like this. Keep in mind, I live in a very small town with not a lot of resources to musicians, etc.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for your call, and to follow the Steubenville professor's approach, I want to just put in a plug here. I run a foundation that is trying to do exactly what Lisa is asking for, to help promote and encourage the use of polyphony and chant in parishes and even in families. My family sings together as a small polyphonic ensemble, and we sing at masses and liturgies around where we live. And so we really encourage people to do this, to seek out exactly what Lisa is asking. How can I bring chant and polyphony into my parish? How can I encourage people to do that? So you can find our foundation on the website at Polyphony and Chant, POLYPHONYANDCHANT, polyphonyandchant.org, and we're happy to take any inquiries to help people figure out different approaches for these things. As far as how to address Lisa's question specifically, it's an enormous topic, and I'd be happy also if she would contact me through the foundation. I can give her more specific information and ways to follow up. The first thing is you have to respect the people who are there, and even if they're doing something that you don't like, you can't just come in, and I'm not saying Lisa's doing this, but just as a general approach, you can't walk into a music director's office and say, hey, why don't you do things my way?
Right.
Even though if you're trying to say, well, my way is the church's way, but people don't generally react well to that kind of pressure, and some pastors are open to chant and polyphony, and others aren't. I think that what you want, I think what often works well is if people start up little chant scholas or polyphonic scholas on their own, and they approach the music director or the pastor and they say, hey, I have this little ensemble. We would like to give a concert or sing at a Vespers or sing at a Mass, and try to have a musical resource that's ready to be shared with the parish, instead of coming to the parish and saying, why don't you do X or Y? Because if you have a receptive person there, they perhaps are already doing that anyway. And if you don't have a receptive person, then asking them to change their approach may or may not be well received. But coming and saying, I've got this music that I'd love to share in the parish environment, how can I do that, might be a good, let's say, a good political approach to how to bring this music there. There are enormous numbers of church documents that have been written about the use of polyphony, the use of chant, how sacred music, the word sacred means set apart, and how the music needs not to reflect secular experiences when you go to Mass. You don't want to go to Mass and feel like you're in an opera house or feel like you're in a jazz club or that you're at a rock concert or something like that, that the Mass needs to be this particular experience, and the church documents are very explicit about that. So you can find a lot of backup for your position that churches should have actual church music in them. But again, that intellectual argument will only carry you so far if you have non-receptive people that you are talking to. So it's I think best to have musical resources at the ready, as well as intellectual arguments, So you can approach someone as an invitation as opposed to making some kind of demand for change.
Right.
And nothing ever happens quickly, so we always have to be patient in these things. But anyway, again, I would encourage Lisa and anyone else to reach out to me through the foundation, and I'll be happy to give a lot more specific resources to help polyphony and chant become more of a reality in the musical lives of our parishes throughout the United States and elsewhere.
Well, well said. Chris, Lisa, hope that works. Please get in touch with Chris and the foundation. And thank you so much for the call. I'm glad we're together on this, Lisa. This is awesome. Very cool. But Chris, one question. We're getting a lot of text messages and emails saying, how can we get the CDs? How can people get the CDs? We're going to hear another clip from, I'm assuming it's from the same CD that you produced. How can one get those? Is that at the same location that you told Lisa to go to?
Well, what I would encourage people to do, or perhaps what you could do, is anybody that's interested in those recordings should drop me a line at the foundation. What you have are pre-production clips, so the disc itself is not quite finished. We're in the post-production phase, so I wanted to share the music with you because I think it does such a beautiful job of demonstrating what this polyphony is about. But the recording is not yet available. But I'm happy to collect information from anybody who is interested in it and then let them know when it becomes available.
Right. Perfect. One real quick thing before we get to the next, I believe we're going to do the next clip, Jerry, but I just want to real quickly, Lisa's comment, because I loved it, and she said she was from a small town, and so it may be difficult, possibly to introduce it or whatnot. And you gave some great advice, Chris, which I totally agree. I've worked in the parishes for many, many years, so I understand that you just can't go into a music minister's office and say, hey, we've got this great stuff. We're going to start introducing this. But one thing that we did at our parish is we actually introduced Gregorian chant through religious education. And so it came through that way. It came through the religious education classes, and then it got back to the music minister. Yeah, it was really kind of interesting. So I just would
like a great approach.
Yeah, I just would throw that as well because it seemed to work for us. But okay, so Jerry, you're going to introduce the next piece?
Yeah, well, we have another clip from Ars Mueller. That is Chris Mueller's ensemble that we are going to have Jeff play for us right now. By the way, you're listening to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. If you'd like to join us, our phone number is 1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. All right, Chris, this one is Ascendes Christus. Was I even close on the Latin? Ascendes Christus?
Pretty close. Ascendens Christus. Mm-hmm.
Ascendens Christus, okay. Well, I mentioned I went to Franciscan University, and that's where I studied Latin, so it's been 24 years. But anyway,
if you don't use
this?
it all the time, it may not be something that is immediate in your mind.
That's right. So what's this beautiful piece by your ensemble about, Chris?
This is a piece for ascension. The text, Ascendens Christus means Christ ascending on high. And Victoria was perhaps the greatest Spanish composer at the end of the Renaissance. And this piece is, I think, a kind of exciting, captivating musical depiction of the disciples standing around and Christ ascends on high, and it's this invigorating experience for them. Of course, it's they didn't quite yet know what they were seeing, and we, with the advantage of many centuries, now do know. And so there's, I think, a confidence in the music that perhaps the disciples may not have had when they saw Jesus being lifted up. But I think that the piece is very beautiful, and for a lot of people who sometimes people say, well, polyphony it's boring and it's slow and it sounds like a dirge or whatever. When you listen to a piece like this, it doesn't sound like that at all. So it's a good contrasting piece to show that polyphony can have life and excitement in a more overt way and not just in the mystical way of that earlier piece by Loretier that we heard.
All right, Joan in Medina, Ohio, you'll be next right after we listen to this. This is Ascendens Christus by Ars Ensemble on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Chris, here it goes again. I'm listening to it, and I don't know what I can't explain it. My soul just starts leaping. It's unbelievable. My spirit just starts leaping. It's like my whole body just responds to it in a very unique way. And wow. I mean, it's really amazing. I could just this is the kind of music I do want to hear in the liturgy, but also I think it would be great in our homes. That can you imagine playing this on a regular basis and just our homes being so filled with a spiritual kind of uplifting?
Yeah,
amazing.
It's like I said before. There are many groups that recognize the beauty of this music and sing it and perform it and record it. So there are lots of recordings out there, and we'll soon be adding our own to that large corpus of recordings. Also, I encourage people to sing this music, to put together groups of friends and try to learn simple pieces of polyphony. I mentioned before that my family and I sing together as a schola, and we sing fairly simple chants and fairly simple pieces of polyphony, and some complicated ones too. At masses where we are fortunate enough to be invited. And I grew up in the 80s, and my head is full of all kinds of 80s pop music, and my kids walk around the house singing chant and polyphony. And I think, man, I wish I had filled my head with that stuff when I was their age.
Beautiful.
So they're just they're going to have a very different soundtrack for all the rest of their lives. So I agree with you completely that when you fill your ears, your heart with this kind of music, it makes an impact on all the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And I think Joan agrees as well in Ohio. Joan, we're going to get to you. You're listening to EWTN Radio on Living Bread Radio. Hi, Joan. Welcome to Take Two.
Hi, Debbie. Hi, Chris. Good afternoon.
Hi there.
I was calling in regards to the prayer or the song to the Litany of the Saints. And I attend St. Francis Xavier Church in Medina, and recently one of our priests, Father Tom Kowach, led us in at Mass in praying and singing this litany, and it gave me such a spiritual and emotional connection with our angels and saints. And we as a community, then we also had input to it. And I thought it was just so soothing to my mind and in my heart, and especially in these days when we have so many challenges. And I remember when I was growing up, we would, on a regular basis, sing to the litany, sing this litany. And I'm wondering, why don't we even do it more often in church? Because I think there was about a month ago that Father Tom had that for us. And prior to that, my gosh, I don't think I've really heard it for a long time.
Chris, we got about 2 minutes, but these are some great comments from Joan, are they not?
Sure. Yeah, the Litany of the Saints is something that is often used at the Easter Vigil Mass to go along with the baptism of new Christians. So perhaps it was in that context that you heard it. It's not something that is used regularly in the Mass, but if the litany is something that speaks to you, you can certainly talk to your priest and ask him if there are other times during the year where it might be included in the liturgy. Like I said, it's usually used at the Easter Vigil as a part of the baptisms, and if there aren't people being baptized at the Easter Vigil, then perhaps it might be omitted one year when that part of the rite isn't there. But the nice thing about the Litany of the Saints is that it's very simple and it's very beautiful. So you name the saint, and then everyone responds, "Pray for us." Ba-da-da-dee-da, ora pro nobis. Da-da-da-dee-da, ora pro nobis, or pray for us. And you really get into this rhythm, a meditative, almost a kind of trance-like experience of just having all these saints invoked, and you ask each one of them to pray for us, and the state that your soul can be moved to by that repetition of that simple response again and again and again. I can certainly see how that would be a powerful experience,
Yes.
and especially if it's not something that you experience regularly. I have the good fortune of working with the Sisters of Life every year in their Mass of Profession, where the sisters profess perpetual vows, and the Litany of the Saints is something that they use in that context as well. They invoke all the saints to bless and support the sisters as they pledge their vows and permanently bind themselves to the religious community there. So I enjoy the Litany of the Saints in that context as well.
I do as well. Beautiful. Great call today, Joan. Thank you so very much. And all the others, we're so sorry we couldn't get to you, but you're asking about resources. So real quickly, Chris, thank you so much for imparting to us your expertise on this, your passion for it, your love for it, because it really, I think it impacted all of us. So Chris, where can we find you again at the foundation? We want to make sure because people are asking.
Sure. Please look us up at polyphonyandchant.org. That's the Christopher Mueller Foundation for Polyphony and Chant. And we have recordings there. We have many resources, and we're always happy to answer questions from people who want to know more about what to listen to or what to sing or how to approach people about bringing Polyphony and Chant to their parishes. We've worked with families to start up their own family scholas, and we just really want to help anybody that's interested in this music to make it more of a present reality in any kind of context.
Beautiful. Jerry?
Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for being on with us. And I know I have learned a lot, and I've always had a love for polyphony and chant, and I know that has just grown and increased today. So thanks so much for being on with us, and we pray God's rich and abundant blessings upon you and the fine work that you're doing. And boy, Debbie, as we wrap up another broadcast here, we're going to hear a little tiny bit of a clip from Chris's ensemble here. And tomorrow, folks, Adam Bly joins us. Very different topic, parenting in a demonic culture. So please be with us tomorrow. God bless.
Absolutely. Okay, are we...